These three wines, red, rosé, and white, were all made from the same grape variety. 3 different wines, 1 grape. This seems odd. Doesn't a certain grape produce a certain wine color? Well, actually, all wine grapes naturally produce white wine. All of them. Well, there is one exception, but it's so rare that it's practically unknown and unavailable. So how can it be that all grapes produce white wine? And how do we then account for the existence of red and rosé wines? I'm Jan. Let's do wine. Today I'm drinking a Spanish rosé made of Syrah and Grenache, which usually make red wines, but today they make a clue for this video. The alcohol content is low, 12%. We're working, right? And the residual sugars are 5 grams per liter. I'm also wearing gray to match my wine. Another clue. So why is a wine that we think should be dark red instead of pale rosé? We tend to think of wines as being red, rosé, and white. It seems like the most basic and certainly easiest way to classify wine. But let's go back to before the wine was made and classify the wine grapes themselves. We can do this dozens of different ways, but for today, we need to classify them by their skin color as either black, gray, or white skinned grapes. Black skinned grapes are those with deep purple, blue, and red skins, like Syrah, also known as Shiraz. Gray skinned grapes are those with light purple, light blue, and pinkish skins like Pinot Grigio. White skinned grapes are those with yellow or green skin like Chardonnay. That's just the skin though. Under the skin, which is about 3 to 5 cells thick, all these grapes have white flesh and white juice, and will therefore produce white wine, and only white wine. So again, how do we get red and rosé wine? When grapes are crushed, the resulting mousse, called must, has 2 components, the liquid juice and all the other solid stuff, called pomace. Pomace includes the grape skins, flesh, seeds, and often the stems and leaves. If the juice is separated from the pomace quickly enough, the wine will always be white. If it's left in contact with the pomace, the juice will acquire many different qualities, including a different taste, smell, and color. The process of leaving the juice in contact with the pomace is called maceration. Maceration is used to make red and rosé wines, but not white wines. And it's the chemicals in the black and gray skinned grapes that pigment the juice. You see, black and gray grape skins contain natural pigments called anthocyanins, which produce the red, purple, blue, and black colors found in many plants, including black and gray grapes. Because anthocyanins are water-soluble, the grape's white juice will absorb them during maceration. Now you may wonder why the grape's juice doesn't absorb those pigments while the skin is still on the grape. That's because the anthocyanins are in little sacs called vacuoles, inside the grape skin cells. The anthocyanins are released only when both the sacs and the skin cells walls are ruptured. A black grape whose juice is separated from the pomace produces a white wine. This is called a blanc de noir, which is French for white from black, a white wine from black grapes. Wines whose juices were left in contact with skins during maceration are called skin contact wines. Red wines are skin contact wines, but not all skin contact wines are red. Limited contact with black skin produces a rosé, as does contact with gray skin. Now, some wine people will quibble about different ways to create rosés, but in all cases it is skin contact. Rosés are absolutely not produced by mixing red and white wine. In France, it's actually illegal for wine producers to mix red and white wine, except in very rare and very regulated circumstances like champagne production. I believe it's the only crime still punishable by guillotine in France. Rosé wines are also, by the way, called gray wines, vin gris. As someone who likes logic, I wish red wines were called black wines, vin noir, for consistency. But alas. Now you might be wondering what happens when you have white skin contact wines. That is to say, what color do you get if you macerate white skin grapes? Well, aside from producing earthquakes and plagues, macerating white grapes produces orange wines, technically still considered white wines, a classification with which I also disagree. I mean, if maceration can make a white wine red, rosé, or orange, and red and rosé are distinct wine categories, why isn't orange a distinct wine category too? But you know what? This is Yonda's Wine, not Yon Air's Grievances, though I think that would probably be a much more fun and interesting show. Still, in the case of orange wines, the orange color comes from a chemical in the seeds, not the skin, though still during maceration. We can do orange wines in another video. Anyway, unless you are trying to produce an orange wine, white wines, regardless of whether they come from a black, gray, or white skinned grape, do not undergo maceration. Now, in terms of red and rosé wines, their specific color and darkness depends on a vast number of complex factors the vintner can and can't control. Those variables would each require their own video, but just as an example, the length of time you allow maceration to take place matters, but not necessarily how you might think. You might think logically that the longer you leave the juice in the pomace, the more color it will absorb, and that's partially true, but only to a point. The anthocyanins transfer from the skin cells to the juice, so the juice gets darker, but then the other stuff in the pomace, like the flesh, start to leach the anthocyanins from the juice. So you're simultaneously adding and removing anthocyanins, and there's a point where the juice starts losing more than it gains, and it's at that point where longer skin contact leads to a lighter wine. And that's just one example. Okay, so there is a special category of grapes that have red flesh. They are called Teinturier grapes, which is a French word that means dyer or stainer. And fun fact, it also means dry cleaner in French, because the first person to use dry cleaning in France was Jean-Baptiste Joly, who worked as a cloth dyer and expanded his operations to include dry cleaning. You know, that's just a bit of trivia you can share if you're at a party and want someone to leave you alone. You're welcome. Teinturier wines are the only red wines that cannot also be white wines. That is to say, they cannot be Blanc de Noir wines. And yet, they are the only red or rosé wines produced using the same process as white wines. Because, as with white wines, you can separate the juice from the pomace and skip the maceration process. We can talk more about these wines in other videos, but suffice it to say that most wine drinkers have never tasted a Teinturier wine. If you have, leave a comment and let us know which one and how you liked it. Anyway, the red and rosé wines you and I drink are all wines that could have been white, but were pigmented during maceration. Now, some people will say that certain grape skins have such dark anthocyanins or such high quantities of anthocyanins that it's impossible to crush the grapes without the juice immediately absorbing some pigment, and hence a true white wine from black-skinned grapes is impossible. They might give the example of so-called white Zinfandel, which is actually rosé. This, however, is not true. It is sometimes difficult to get a real Blanc de Noir because you need to interrupt the coloring process quickly and under the right conditions. But I have had a truly white Zinfandel and a truly white Cabernet Sauvignon. The reality is that Blanc de Noir wines are usually novelties, like orange wines and Teinturier wines. Rarely are they taken seriously, and rarely is there an economic incentive to produce them. But they are quite fascinating, as they look different, taste different, and smell different than their pigmented siblings. Blanc de Gris wines, white wines from gray grapes, however, are quite a bit more common. In fact, most people know Pinot Grigio as a white wine, when in fact it could be a rosé if it was macerated. So just to recap, the skin cells of black and gray skinned grapes have sacs called vacuoles that contain pigments called anthocyanins. If those pigments are absorbed by the grape's white juice during maceration, the wine will become red or rosé. If maceration is not allowed, the wine will remain white, regardless of which grape you're using. I hope you enjoyed this video, learned something new, click the like button, subscribe to this channel, and then hit the little bell icon so you can be notified of future videos. Santé.